Starting on the 1st of next month, your rent is going up to $1,900. I already emailed you the updated lease agreement. Sign it before tomorrow morning. My mother, Vivian, dropped this absolute bombshell right over the clinking of sterling silver forks at our mandatory Sunday family dinner. I froze in my seat. The expensive cut of prime rib I had just placed in my mouth suddenly tasted like dry ash. I looked across the sprawling mahogany table at my mother, searching her face for any sign of a joke, but her expression was perfectly rigid. I then shifted my gaze to my father Desmond, who was casually swirling his glass of imported Merlot. He looked completely unfazed, acting as if raising my rent by $700 overnight was just standard polite dinner conversation to have over roasted asparagus and mashed potatoes. 1900, I asked. I forced my voice to remain dangerously level, refusing to give them the emotional reaction they were so clearly waiting for. Mom, I am living in your outdated drafty duplex on the south side of the city. The same duplex where I had to fix the main plumbing line entirely by myself last month, because Dad absolutely refused to call a professional repair service. The current market rate for that specific neighborhood is $1,200 at the absolute maximum. The economy is really tough right now, Jada, Brittany chimed in. Brittany is my white sister-in-law, and she possesses a syrupy, deeply condescending tone that always sets my teeth on edge. She adjusted her posture in the plush dining chair, casually stroking the leather strap of her brand-new designer handbag. Marcus really needs to expand his luxury cigar club to keep up with his competitors. You are 33 years old. You have no husband, no children, and no real responsibilities tying you down. What is so wrong with contributing a little extra money to support the family entrepreneur? Or do you just want to sit back and watch your own brother fail because you are selfish? Marcus, my 35-year-old brother, puffed out his chest, looking incredibly smug as he sliced into his steak. In our family, Marcus was the undeniable golden child, the perfect son who could do absolutely no wrong in the eyes of our parents. When he suddenly decided he wanted to play businessman 3 years ago, our parents quietly drained $200,000 from their retirement accounts to fund his ridiculous venture. Meanwhile, when I graduated at the very top of my university finance class, my father barely looked up from his newspaper. He simply nodded and told me that maybe I could do my brother's taxes one day. Now they were actively trying to bleed me dry to subsidize his failing vanity project, just so Brittany could keep pretending she was high society for her thousands of followers on social media. They were absolutely obsessed with maintaining this flawless image of black excellence at the local country club, even if it meant completely destroying my financial stability to keep up the charade. You know what, Brittany? You are completely right. I nodded slowly, deliberately setting my silver fork down on the porcelain plate. Contributing to the family legacy is incredibly important, just like how I have been secretly paying the water and electric bills for that luxury cigar club for the past 6 months, simply because Marcus's business credit cards keep getting declined every single week. Marcus's face instantly drained of all color, turning a sickly shade of gray under the dining room chandelier. Brittany snapped her neck toward her husband so fast I honestly thought she might get whiplash. Your credit cards are getting declined. She practically shrieked, her carefully cultivated polite voice vanishing completely, revealing the panic underneath. Marcus, you looked me in the eye yesterday and told me that your profits were at record highs. My father slammed his heavy hand down on the mahogany dining table. The sudden impact made the crystal wine glasses rattle violently. Jada, how dare you disrespect your older brother like that in my house? The roof over your head belongs to me. I own that property, and I can raise the rent to whatever amount I want. You will sign the new lease tonight, or you will get out on the street. Let us see what kind of tiny, miserable hovel you can afford to rent in this city on your mid-level corporate salary. He honestly thought I was just an ordinary, struggling wealth management advisor. He thought I was barely scraping by, desperately dependent on their cheap duplex to survive. My father had absolutely no idea that behind my very modest corporate job title, I was the silent sole owner of a highly lucrative private equity firm. I was personally managing over $50 million in assets, specializing specifically in acquiring distressed commercial debt. I had spent the last decade quietly building an empire while playing the role of the obedient, invisible daughter, entirely to avoid my family's relentless financial parasitism. I knew that if they ever found out about my true wealth, they would drain me just like they drained their own retirement funds for Marcus. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice or argue with them any further. I simply stood up from my chair, reached into my leather purse, and pulled out the heavy brass keys to the duplex. I held them up for a brief moment, letting the metal catch the light from the chandelier, and then I dropped them directly onto my father's dinner plate. They clattered loudly against the fine china, splashing a drop of dark gravy onto the pristine white tablecloth. "You do not have to threaten to evict me, Dad. I am moving out tonight." I smiled. It was a cold, detached expression that actually made my mother flinch backward in her seat. "But you might want to call a professional repairman for the duplex's heating system very soon. I was originally going to pay out of my own pocket to completely upgrade the furnace tomorrow morning. But since you have the keys back now, I guess it is your problem. Good luck with the maintenance. I really hope Marcus's cigar club makes enough profit this month to cover those massive winter utility bills." I turned on my heel and walked out the front door, leaving a suffocated, stunned silence in my wake. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, my phone immediately began vibrating in my pocket. I glanced at the glowing screen. It was blowing up with a rapid succession of threatening text messages. My mother demanded I come back inside and apologize immediately. Marcus sent a string of angry curses blaming me for ruining his marriage. My father texted that I was making the biggest mistake of my life and would be begging to come back by tomorrow morning, once I realized how harsh the real world was. I ignored every single one of them, sliding into my car and starting the engine. They genuinely thought they were kicking out a helpless parasite. They had absolutely no idea they had just violently severed their only actual financial lifeline. And when the commercial bank inevitably came knocking to collect on Marcus's failing business next month, the name listed on the official foreclosure notice would not be some faceless anonymous corporation. The name holding all their debt and holding their entire future in her hands would be mine. I backed out of the sprawling driveway, leaving the perfectly manicured lawn and the illusion of their perfect family far behind me in the rearview mirror. The engine of my car purred softly as I merged onto the main road heading toward the downtown district. I did not feel an ounce of regret or sorrow as the distance between us grew. For years I had allowed their expectations to diminish my worth, accepting their crumbs of affection while carrying the heavy burden of their financial irresponsibility. Not anymore. I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the undeniable thrill of absolute freedom wash over me. The game they thought they were playing had ended tonight, and a new one was about to begin. The tires of my sedan glided smoothly over the damp asphalt as I navigated away from the suffocating suburbs and deeper into the glowing heart of the downtown financial district. The towering glass skyscrapers reflected the city lights, standing as glittering monuments to wealth and power. For my entire adult life, my family assumed I was just another exhausted corporate drone grinding away in a cubicle to barely make my monthly rent. They believed I was trapped in their financial web, completely dependent on their supposed charity. I turned my steering wheel sharply, guiding my car down a secluded, highly secured ramp that led into the underground parking garage of the Sovereign Tower. The private security guard at the gate gave me a respectful nod, immediately recognizing my vehicle, and pressed the button to raise the heavy steel barrier. I parked in my reserved spot, grabbed my designer bag from the passenger seat, and walked straight toward the private residential elevator. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner. The heavy doors slid open seamlessly, carrying me upward to the very top floor. When the elevator doors parted again, I stepped directly into the grand foyer of my immense $2 million luxury penthouse. I had purchased it entirely in cash 6 months ago. The expansive living room featured stunning towering glass windows that offered an uninterrupted panoramic view of the entire city skyline. Custom velvet sofas, sleek marble countertops, and carefully curated modern art filled the massive open design space. I kicked off my heels, letting my bare feet sink into the plush imported Persian rug. Walking over to the custom refrigerated wine fridge, I poured myself a generous glass of vintage Cabernet Sauvignon, savoring the rich, complex flavor. I walked toward the glass wall, looking down at the tiny moving cars on the streets below. My family truly believed I was a failure because I refused to engage in their performative wealthy elite circus. What they did not understand was that while Marcus was busy throwing away our parents' retirement money on flashy cigars and rented sports cars to impress his superficial friends, I was quietly building a ruthless financial empire. My private equity firm did not deal in glamorous vanity projects. We dealt in distressed commercial debt. We bought out failing businesses, liquidated their assets, and restructured their financial portfolios with absolute calculated precision. I had intentionally kept my immense wealth a closely guarded secret for one very simple reason. If my parents or Brittany had ever discovered that I was a silent millionaire, they would have relentlessly harassed, manipulated, and heavily pressured me into permanently funding Marcus's pathetic failing business ventures. They would have expected me to drain my own bank accounts to support his delusions of grandeur, just as they had done with their own life savings. By playing the role of the struggling invisible daughter, I had successfully protected my assets from their toxic, bottomless greed. I took another slow sip of my wine, letting the quiet peace of the penthouse wash over me. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the harsh, vibrating buzz of my phone resting on the marble kitchen island. I walked over and glanced down at the bright screen. It was a new barrage of frantic text messages from my mother. Her tone had completely shifted from arrogant fury to panicked, aggressive demands. I unlocked the screen and read the chaotic block of text she had just sent. Jada, you need to turn your car around and get back to the duplex right this second. The entire heating system just completely shut down, and it is freezing in here. Your father went to the basement to check the furnace, and there is water leaking all over the floor. You told us it was making a weird noise last week, so you obviously know exactly how to fix it. Plumbers are charging double for emergency night calls right now. And Marcus needs all our spare cash for his business expansion this week. Stop throwing this ridiculous dramatic tantrum and come fix the pipes immediately. You owe us for letting you live here so cheaply for the past year. I stared at the glowing screen, letting out a sharp laugh that echoed through the empty, luxurious kitchen. The absolute, unmitigated audacity of her demands was almost breathtaking. Less than 30 minutes ago, she had watched my father threaten to throw me out onto the street, perfectly content to let me freeze. She had sat there and allowed Brittany to mock my entire existence. Now, the second she was faced with a minor financial inconvenience, she expected me to immediately rush back and perform free manual labor just to save her golden boy a few extra dollars. They truly viewed me as nothing more than a convenient disposable tool, a permanent servant assigned to fix the messes they created while they poured all their resources into Marcus. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not feel any obligation to explain myself or justify my sudden departure. I tapped the screen of my phone, navigating directly to her contact profile. Without a moment of hesitation, I pressed the block button. I did the exact same thing for my father, Marcus, and Brittany. I severed their digital access to me with a few swift motions, effectively cutting them off from my life completely. I set the phone down on the marble counter and walked to my home office. I opened my sleek laptop and securely logged into my private equity firm's highly encrypted financial database. The blue light illuminated my face in the darkened room. It was time to stop playing defense. I typed Marcus's business name into the commercial loan registry, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I pulled up the comprehensive portfolio containing the cigar club's outstanding debts, unpaid vendor liens, and commercial mortgage deficits. The numbers painted a picture of absolute impending disaster. I stared at the glowing digits on my screen. My sudden departure would terrify them because it threatened their carefully curated public image. They needed a convenient narrative to explain why I vanished. That narrative arrived exactly 3 days later at the annual charity gala. The gala was the premier social event for the city's black upper class, a dazzling showcase of wealth and fierce social competition. My mother and Brittany viewed the event as the ultimate battlefield to assert their dominance. They had no idea I secured my place at the very center. I arrived at the grand ballroom an hour after the doors opened, timing my entrance for maximum impact. I stepped out of a black town car, wearing a custom emerald silk gown that hugged my curves perfectly. The fabric caught the venue lights as I walked up the velvet carpeted stairs. My escort was Julian Sterling, a highly influential real estate developer whose net worth dwarfed my father's entire social circle. He was also my private equity firm's most trusted consulting partner. He offered his arm with a charming smile, fully aware of the social warfare we were about to engage in. We handed our invitations to the concierge and glided into the opulent chandelier-lit ballroom. The indoor air was thick with expensive perfume and live classical string music. It did not take long to spot my mother and sister-in-law. They were holding court near the champagne fountain, surrounded by a tight circle of prominent doctors, lawyers, and politicians' wives. I smoothly guided Julian toward a nearby pillar, standing just close enough to hear their conversation without being seen. "It is just so incredibly tragic, my mother." Vivian sighed dramatically, placing a perfectly manicured hand against her chest. "Desmond and I tried everything we could to help Jada. We let her live in our rental property for free, but her spending habits are entirely out of control. She maxed out 4 credit cards, buying ridiculous designer clothes she cannot afford on her tiny corporate salary. We had to legally evict her on Sunday night," Brittany added, shaking her head with an expression of artificial pity. She adjusted the heavy diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. "Marcus was completely heartbroken, but we have to protect our family's financial future. Jada is completely broke. She had to pack her bags and move into some terrible cheap motel across town. We are praying she finally learns some basic financial responsibility." A chorus of sympathetic gasps and judgmental murmurs rippled through their wealthy audience. They were eating up every single lie. Vivian and Brittany were successfully assassinating my character, painting me as a pathetic, financially illiterate disaster to protect Marcus's fragile reputation. They were exploiting my silence to elevate their own status in the community, spinning a web of absolute deceit to mask the reality that they were bleeding dry. "Well, that is a truly fascinating story, Brittany," I said loudly. I stepped out from behind the marble pillar, letting the light catch the brilliant emerald silk of my gown. The entire circle of women turned toward me simultaneously. My mother's jaw practically unhinged. Brittany's eyes widened so far I thought they might pop out of her skull. They stared at me then, at the incredibly powerful, recognizable billionaire standing casually by my side, with his hand resting respectfully on my lower back. "Jada." My mother choked out her voice, barely a squeak. "What are you doing here? You cannot afford a ticket to this gala." "Oh, I did not buy a ticket, Mom." I smiled warmly, projecting my voice so the surrounding crowd could hear every single word. "I am actually a sponsor. But please do continue your fascinating story about my supposed eviction. I would love to hear more about these imaginary credit card debts you just invented." Before Brittany could stammer out a frantic excuse, the heavy microphone on the main stage cracked to life. The regional president of the foundation, an elegant woman in a sparkling silver dress, tapped her crystal glass to command the room's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could please have your attention," the president announced, her voice echoing through the massive ballroom. "Before we begin our charity auction, I want to take a very special moment to acknowledge the incredible generosity that made tonight possible. For the first time in our chapter's history, the entire cost of this magnificent gala has been completely covered by an anonymous donor." The crowd erupted into polite, curious applause. My mother and Brittany were still staring at me, frozen in absolute terror, their minds desperately trying to process the impossibility of my presence. They looked like deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming freight train. "Our donor recently requested to reveal herself, as she is deeply committed to supporting our community's future." The president continued, gesturing warmly toward our side of the room. "Please join me in giving a massive round of applause to our diamond sponsor, the CEO of Vanguard Equity Holdings, Miss Jada Henderson." A blinding spotlight swung violently across the dark ballroom, landing directly on me. The entire room turned, clapping enthusiastically as they recognized Julian Sterling standing respectfully beside me. The elite socialites who had just been listening to my mother's vicious lies now looked at Vivian and Brittany with absolute unmasked confusion. I smiled brilliantly into the bright spotlight, giving the crowd a graceful wave. I then turned my attention back to my mother, whose face was completely drained of blood. Brittany looked as though she might vomit onto her expensive shoes. The perfect, flawless illusion of their social dominance was shattering into a million pieces right in front of their eyes. As you were saying, Brittany, I asked, keeping my tone light and musical. You were just explaining to everyone here how I am living in a cheap motel. Please go on. I am sure everyone is dying to hear the rest of your story. The ballroom remained completely silent, the kind of heavy, expectant quiet that only occurs when high society smells fresh blood in the water. Every single gaze in our vicinity was locked onto Brittany and my mother. Brittany opened her mouth, closed it, and then opened it again like a gasping fish. Her pale skin had turned a vibrant, blotchy shade of crimson that clashed horribly with her pastel pink evening gown. She desperately looked around at the circle of influential doctors and lawyers' wives she had been trying to impress just moments ago, but they were now looking at her with thinly veiled disgust. In this specific circle, lying about your wealth was considered a faux pas, but getting publicly caught lying about someone else's wealth was an absolute unforgivable social death sentence. I do not know what kind of cheap trick you are pulling, Jada, Brittany finally hissed. Her voice shook violently, but she tried to puff out her chest and salvage her pride. She pointed a manicured finger at my custom gown. You probably rented that dress. You probably paid this man to stand next to you so you could look important. You are just a bitter single woman who is jealous of Marcus and me. You have always been jealous of our success and our beautiful marriage. I felt Julian shift slightly beside me, a low chuckle rumbling in his chest. I gently squeezed his arm, signaling that I had this entirely under control. I took a slow, deliberate step closer to Brittany, invading her personal space just enough to make her instinctively step backward. Jealous of your success? I asked, my voice carrying clearly over the soft string music playing in the background. Brittany, please tell me exactly what success you are referring to. Are you talking about the success of your husband's luxury cigar club? Because if I remember correctly, the primary liquor distributor, Davis & Sons, placed Marcus on a strict cash-only basis last Tuesday due to 3 consecutive bounced checks. A sharp gasp echoed from the woman standing directly to Brittany's left. It was Mrs. Davis, the wife of the very liquor distributor I had just mentioned. Brittany whipped her head toward the woman, her eyes wide with absolute horror. And let us not forget the elite catering service you use for those lavish private events you post all over your social media. I continued smoothly, not giving her a single second to recover. Chef Laurent has been calling Marcus every single day this week, threatening to take him to small claims court over $14,000 in unpaid invoices. So please enlighten me, Brittany. Is that the brilliant financial success I am supposed to be so desperately jealous of? You are lying! Brittany shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the marble floors. She completely abandoned any remaining pretense of high society elegance. You are just a jealous, pathetic liar. Look at me. Look at the jewelry my husband buys for me. She aggressively tapped the massive glittering diamond pendant, resting heavily on her chest. Marcus bought this for me just yesterday. It is worth more than your entire life. I looked down at the necklace. I let a slow, knowing smile spread across my face. I tilted my head, examining the stones with the practiced calculating eye of a wealth management expert. It is a very beautiful piece, Brittany, I said softly. But you really should tell Marcus to be much more careful when he shops at those discount cubic zirconia retailers in the fashion district. The setting is plated brass, not platinum, and the center stone is cloudy. A real diamond of that size would catch the light from the chandelier, but yours is just absorbing it. Honestly, it looks like something you pulled out of a quarter machine at a rundown bowling alley. The surrounding women simultaneously leaned in their eyes, locking onto Brittany's chest. One of them, a prominent jeweler's wife, actually pulled her reading glasses out of her clutch to get a better look. Brittany frantically covered the necklace with both of her hands, her face now a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. The carefully constructed facade of her wealthy, privileged lifestyle was collapsing right in front of her. She was being exposed as a total fraud, wearing fake jewelry while her husband drowned in commercial debt. Jada, that is enough, my mother suddenly barked. Vivian stepped firmly between Brittany and me, her eyes blazing with a mixture of terror and furious indignation. She tried to grab my arm, but Julian smoothly stepped forward, blocking her path with his imposing frame. My mother shrank back instantly, recognizing that she had absolutely no power here. You are ruining this family's reputation. You are making us look like fools in front of all my friends. Fix this right now and tell them you are joking. I am not a comedian, Mom, and this is certainly not a joke, I replied coldly. You two are the ones who decided to stand in the middle of a prestigious charity gala and spread vicious, malicious lies about my financial status. I am simply correcting the public record with verifiable facts. If the truth makes you look like fools, then perhaps you should take a very hard look at the reality of the life you are pretending to live. You are a monster, Vivian whispered, her voice trembling with rage. Marcus is your own flesh and blood. He is your brother. You are supposed to protect him. Marcus is a 35-year-old man who needs to learn how to pay his own bills, I stated firmly. And you need to learn that you cannot use me as a convenient scapegoat to cover up his massive failures anymore. I looked at Brittany, who was now quietly sobbing, her face buried in her hands to hide her shame from the elite women watching her with absolute, complete, utterly brutal societal contempt right now. Word of Brittany's fake diamond and Marcus's unpaid bills spread through the city's elite circles like wildfire. Within 48 hours, the few remaining legitimate suppliers pulled their credit lines. His luxury cigar lounge hit a devastating financial brick wall. That Friday morning, Marcus completely failed to make his scheduled employee payroll. The panicked whispers of a mass staff walkout reached my ears through my firm's network before my family could even process the disaster. Cornered and bleeding cash, that specific desperation drove my father to do something completely unprecedented. I was standing in the marble lobby of the corporate wealth management firm, where I maintained my employment facade, quietly reviewing a portfolio, when the revolving doors burst open. My father, Desmond, stormed into the high-security lobby like a raging bull. His designer suit was wrinkled, his tie askew, and his face flushed crimson. He bypassed the reception desk entirely, ignoring the startled receptionist. "Jada!" he roared, his booming voice shattering the hushed atmosphere. Heads snapped up from behind mahogany desks. Wealthy clients and senior partners paused their conversations to stare at the enraged man marching across the floor. "Jada, get over here right this second. Do not hide from me." Two security guards immediately stepped forward, their hands resting cautiously on their belts. I raised a swift hand, signaling the guards to stand down. I could not allow my father to create a massive spectacle that would draw unwanted attention to my carefully constructed corporate cover. I smoothed down my tailored navy suit, pasted a perfectly calm smile onto my face, and intercepted him before he reached the elevators. "Dad, you are causing a massive scene in my workplace," I said, keeping my voice low and sharp. "What exactly are you doing here?" "I am here because your brother is drowning," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger directly at my face, not caring that wealthy executives were watching. "Marcus missed payroll. His employees are threatening to sue him. You are going to take out a personal loan against your salary right now. I need $75,000 by the end of business today to save your brother's company, and you are providing it." I stared at the man who raised me. He was demanding that I plunge myself into inescapable debt just to bail out his golden child. He expected me to sacrifice my own financial security for Marcus's fragile ego. "We are not doing this in the lobby," I stated firmly. I grabbed his upper arm and forcefully steered him away from the gawking crowd. I guided him down a quiet hallway and directly into a soundproof glass-walled conference room. I shut the heavy door securely behind us, cutting off the ambient noise. My father paced the entire length of the room like an angry, caged animal. "You have excellent credit, Jada. You work in a financial firm. You can easily secure a loan for your brother. You owe this family for embarrassing us last week. Marcus is on the verge of losing everything because you refused to act like a supportive sister." I walked over to the polished conference table. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, meticulously organized manila folder. I dropped it onto the glass table with a heavy, definitive thud. "Marcus is not losing everything because of me, Dad," I said, pulling out a sleek leather chair and sitting down. "Marcus is losing everything because he is a thief. Open the folder." My father stopped pacing. He glared at me, his chest heaving with angry breaths, but his eyes darted down to the file. Slowly he walked over and flipped the cover open. Those are the comprehensive, unedited financial records for the Sovereign Leaf, spanning the last 14 months. I explained calmly, watching his eyes scan the top page. I have access to exceptional forensic accountants. What you are looking at is not a failing business model. It is active aggressive embezzlement. What are you talking about? My father demanded, though his voice wavered slightly. Marcus has just had some bad luck with the market. Marcus has had bad luck because he is treating his commercial business loans like a personal piggy bank, I corrected him sharply. I leaned forward, tapping a specific column of highlighted numbers on the spreadsheet. Look at the third page. 3 weeks ago, Marcus withdrew $40,000 from the company's operational fund. He categorized it as a venue renovation expense. He did not renovate anything. He used that exact amount to buy Brittany a brand new Mercedes SUV. Look at the next page. $15,000 marked as vendor payments. It was actually wired directly to a luxury travel agency to pay for Brittany's upcoming birthday trip to St. Bart's. I flipped to the final summary page, pointing to a massive deficit highlighted in bright red ink. Your golden child is not a struggling entrepreneur, I stated, letting every single word land with brutal precision. Marcus is actively draining his own company to fund his wife's ridiculous high society delusions. He is stealing the money you gave him. He missed payroll because he bought his wife a car instead of paying the people who actually work for him. I am not taking out a loan to fund a criminal. My father stared at the damning numbers. The paper literally trembled in his hands as the undeniable, factual reality of his son's betrayal stared him right in the face. But the deep, toxic delusion he had built around Marcus was too strong to break. His jaw clenched tight, his eyes hardening into dark, furious slits. He violently slammed the folder shut, tossing it across the glass table. "These are completely fabricated," he yelled, his face twisting with absolute denial. "You forged these documents because you are jealous. Marcus would never steal from his own company. You are a bitter, spiteful woman, Jada." He turned around and stormed out of the conference room. I watched through the soundproof glass walls as my father practically ran toward the lobby elevators. He did not look back even once. His refusal to accept the undeniable mathematical reality of Marcus's embezzlement was a masterclass in willful ignorance. He would rather believe his own daughter had fabricated a massive financial dossier than admit his golden son was a glorified con artist. I remained seated in the conference room for several long minutes, carefully sliding the rejected paperwork back into my leather briefcase. My father had made his choice. He had chosen the comfortable lie over the brutal truth, sealing his own financial fate. I walked back to my desk, packed up my belongings, and quietly left the wealth management firm for the day. There was no longer any need to maintain the illusion of being a struggling corporate advisor. The war had officially moved into my territory. Over the next 48 hours, the situation at the luxury cigar club rapidly deteriorated from a minor crisis into an absolute catastrophe. Marcus completely failed to make payroll for the second week in a row. His bartenders, waitstaff, and security personnel coordinated a massive, highly publicized walkout right in the middle of the lucrative Friday night shift. Disgruntled employees took to social media, posting videos of the empty lounge and warning potential customers about Marcus's shady business practices. The vendors who had previously extended them grace now filed aggressive formal complaints with the city's commercial board. Marcus was bleeding cash at an unprecedented rate. Brittany was making the situation infinitely worse by refusing to cancel her incredibly expensive, non-refundable birthday trip to St. Bart's. She genuinely believed the bad press was just a temporary hurdle that my father would easily wave away with his checkbook. But my father did not have the liquid cash required to plug a hole that massive. Desmond and Vivian had already drained the vast majority of their retirement savings to fund the initial launch of the cigar club. They were living entirely on my father's architectural firm's salary and the social capital attached to our family's prestigious name. To save Marcus from immediate crushing bankruptcy and protect their fragile image of upper-class perfection, my father needed to generate $500,000 in liquid capital within days. Traditional banks completely laughed him out of their offices. Marcus possessed a credit score that was practically non-existent. The Cigar Club's financial records were an absolute nightmare of unpaid invoices and suspicious withdrawals. No legitimate, federally regulated financial institution was going to touch that toxic mess with a 10-foot pole. Driven by absolute desperation and a terrifying level of parental denial, Desmond bypassed the traditional banking system entirely. He ventured into the murky, aggressive world of unregulated commercial lending. He approached a notoriously predatory hard money lender known for issuing exorbitant high-risk mezzanine loans with crushing interest rates and brutal repayment terms. These shadow lenders did not care about credit scores or business plans. They only cared about one thing: collateral. And my father, blinded by his obsessive need to protect his son, offered them the absolute ultimate prize. He put up our family's sprawling multi-million-dollar ancestral estate as the sole collateral for the commercial loan. This was the magnificent historic property in the affluent suburbs that my grandparents had worked their entire lives to pay off. It was the crown jewel of our family's legacy, a symbol of generational wealth and stability that was supposed to be passed down for decades. Desmond secretly signed the deed over to the predatory lenders without telling my mother. He was fully convinced that Marcus would easily turn the business around and repay the loan within a few short months. How was gambling the literal roof over his family's head to fund his son's fraudulent lifestyle? He had absolutely no idea that the specific commercial lending network he had just engaged with was heavily monitored by my private equity firm. 2 days later, I was sitting behind the massive obsidian desk in my penthouse office, reviewing the latest market acquisitions. My secure tablet chimed with a high-priority notification from Julian Sterling's investment group. Vanguard Equity Holdings utilized advanced, proprietary algorithms to track heavily distressed commercial paper hitting the local market. Julian had flagged a newly originated, extremely high-risk debt package that required my immediate authorization. I opened the encrypted file and stared at the digital paperwork. My heart beat with a slow, heavy rhythm as I read the legal documents. There it was, displayed in black and white text on my high-resolution monitor. Desmond Henderson. A predatory commercial loan for $500,000 carrying an absolutely astronomical interest rate that compounded monthly. Listed directly underneath the loan terms signed in my father's familiar sweeping handwriting was the deed to the family estate. I zoomed in on the signature page, feeling a cold, hollow sensation spread through my chest. He had actually done it. He had signed away our history, our safety, and our legacy, all to protect a thief who was actively spending the money on designer handbags and island vacations. The recklessness of the financial move was difficult to comprehend. My parents were willing to lose everything for Marcus. They had chosen to burn down their own house just to keep him warm. I closed the digital file and leaned back in my leather executive chair. A quiet, terrifying clarity washed over me. I had tried to warn him. I had literally handed him the irrefutable evidence of Marcus's massive embezzlement, and he had thrown it back in my face. I was completely done playing the role of the warning siren. If my parents truly wanted to play a dangerous, high-stakes game of financial roulette with predatory lenders, I was going to make sure I owned the casino. I slowly picked up my secure phone, dialed Julian's line, and prepared to make the most ruthless acquisition of my career. I held the secure phone to my ear, listening to the brief, sterile digital hum, before Julian finally answered. "Julian, I am looking at the newly originated debt file from the shadow lenders," I said, my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "I want it. I want Vanguard Equity Holdings to acquire that specific commercial paper before the market even opens tomorrow morning. Buy out the originating firm's position entirely if you have to. Do whatever it takes to secure the primary creditor status on Desmond Henderson's loan." Julian let out a low whistle on the other end of the line. "That is incredibly aggressive, Jada. The ink is barely dry on that deed transfer. Are you absolutely certain about assuming this level of risk? The collateral is highly emotional for the debtor." "That is exactly why I want it," I replied coldly. "I know the debtor personally. He will inevitably default, and when he does, I want our firm holding the only legal key to that sprawling estate. Execute the acquisition immediately." Within the next 48 hours, the massive financial transaction was officially completed behind firmly closed doors. My private equity firm legally absorbed the predatory lending portfolio. I was now the absolute uncontested owner of my parents' crippling commercial debt. I instructed my legal team to enforce the original brutal terms of the contract down to the absolute exact letter. There would be zero grace periods. There would be zero leniency for late payments. The interest would compound exactly as outlined in the ruthless agreement my father had foolishly signed. He had walked willingly into a financial slaughterhouse, and I was simply locking the door safely behind him. While I was methodically securing the legal chains around my family's financial future, Marcus was desperately trying to keep his sinking ship afloat across town. The cash injection from my father's reckless loan had briefly stabilized the cigar club's immediate terrifying crisis. Marcus had quickly paid off the furious liquor distributors and temporarily pacified the highly threatening catering companies. However, instead of using the remaining capital to restructure his failing business model or establish a sustainable payroll account for his angry employees, he found himself facing a completely different, entirely domestic catastrophe. Brittany was absolutely furious. She paced the length of their heavily mortgaged suburban living room, her face twisted into an ugly, petulant scowl. "I do not care about your stupid supplier invoices, Marcus," she shrieked, throwing a velvet throw pillow against the wall. "My milestone birthday trip to St. Bart's has been planned for 6 months. All of my friends have already booked their flights. You promised me we were flying first class and staying in the oceanfront villa." Marcus rubbed his temples, visibly sweating under the immense pressure of his crumbling reality. "Brittany, you have to understand the timing right now. The business just took a massive hit. My dad had to pull some major strings just to keep the doors open this week. We have to delay the vacation. I can barely afford to keep the lights on at the club right now." "Delay my birthday?" Brittany scoffed, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "Absolutely not. Do you have any idea how humiliating that would be? What am I supposed to tell the wealthy girls at the country club? That my so-called successful entrepreneur husband is actually a broke fraud who cannot even afford a basic island vacation? They are already whispering about that disastrous charity gala where your sister embarrassed us. If we cancel this trip, my social reputation will be completely destroyed." The sheer blinding entitlement radiating from her was staggering. She was entirely oblivious to the fact that her husband's business was a hollow shell built entirely on stolen retirement funds and a predatory loan secured by his parents' home. She did not know, and she certainly did not care. All that mattered to Brittany was maintaining the flawless wealthy illusion she broadcast to her followers online. "Please, baby, just give me one more month to get the cash flow back to normal," Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking with pure desperation. "If I pull those funds out of the operational account right now, I will not be able to pay the waitstaff on Friday. They will walk out again." Brittany marched right up to him, pointing a sharp manicured finger directly at his chest. "If you do not wire that money to the luxury travel agency by 5 o'clock today, I am packing my bags and going to stay with my mother. I did not marry you to live like some struggling middle-class housewife. You figure it out, Marcus. Get the money from your father. Steal it if you have to. I do not care. Just pay for my vacation." Faced with the immediate terrifying threat of a highly public marital separation, Marcus's fragile ego completely shattered. He could not handle the thought of his perfect wife leaving him over money. He could not stomach the inevitable gossip that would tear through their elite social circles. Blinded by panic and a desperate need to preserve his fake alpha male image, he made the final fatal mistake of his entire disastrous career. He pulled out his laptop, logged into the cigar club's newly replenished commercial bank account, and stared at the remaining funds. It was the exact money meant to cover his upcoming critical loan repayment and his employee payroll. His hands shook violently as he clicked the transfer button. He wired $15,000 directly to the luxury travel agency to secure Brittany's oceanfront villa in St. Bart's. In that single impulsive moment of profound weakness, Marcus completely hollowed out his last remaining operational funds. He effectively slit the throat of his own business just to buy himself a few more days of peace at home. He sat back in his chair, staring blankly at the depleted bank balance, hoping a miracle would somehow occur before the end of the month. He had no idea that there were no miracles left. There was only the brutal, unforgiving reality of the debt he owed and the silent, patient creditor waiting in the shadows to collect it. The first of the month arrived with the cold precision of a ticking clock. Inside the servers of Vanguard Equity Holdings, an automated alert flashed across my primary monitor. Marcus had officially missed his critical commercial loan repayment. By draining his accounts to fund Brittany's extravagant vacation, he left nothing behind to satisfy the shadow lenders. The predatory contract my father foolishly signed allowed for 0 grace periods. The exact second the clock struck midnight, a late penalty was applied and compounding interest doubled. My firm was legally authorized to initiate asset forfeiture. I sat back watching the numbers update in real time. The trap had successfully snapped shut. Across town, the reality of their ruin was breaking through their delusions. The fallout was instantaneous and utterly chaotic. I expected angry emails, but I underestimated my mother's desperation. 3 days after the missed payment, the private intercom on my desk buzzed sharply. It was the lobby concierge sounding unusually flustered. Before he could apologize for the security breach, the heavy doors of my penthouse office swung open. Vivian marched right into my private sanctuary. I later learned she relentlessly harassed my former landlord, hired a cheap investigator, and faked a medical emergency to bypass security. She stood in the entryway, fully prepared to unleash a torrent of verbal abuse. But the angry words died in her throat the moment she looked around. Vivian froze her eyes, darting frantically across the massive living space. She took in the soaring windows, offering a breathtaking view of the downtown skyline. She stared at the Italian marble floors, the crystal chandelier, and the contemporary art lining the walls. I watched her face undergo a fascinating transformation. The initial shock melted into absolute burning jealousy. Her jaw tightened as she processed the reality of my lifestyle. For my entire life, she viewed herself as the pinnacle of society, looking down on me as a disappointment. Now, she stood inside a penthouse that made her mortgaged estate look like a cheap starter home. The realization that I possessed immense, untouchable wealth sickened her. Her hands balled into tight fists at her sides. She was completely humiliated by her own surroundings. However, Vivian quickly realized that anger would not save her precious golden child. She swallowed her toxic pride and switched tactics. Her rigid posture crumbled, her shoulders slumped, and she forced artificial tears into her eyes. She took a slow step forward, pressing her hand against her chest in a display of maternal heartbreak. "Jada, please, you have to listen to me," she cried, her voice quivering with manufactured sorrow. "You have no idea what is happening right now. We are losing absolutely everything. Marcus is in terrible trouble with the bank and your father is sick with worry. I know you are angry with us, but you cannot abandon your own flesh and blood. Look at this place, Jada. Look at how incredibly successful you are. You have been hiding all this money while your brother was drowning in debt. How could you be so selfish? You have more than enough wealth to pay off that commercial loan right now and save our family from ruin." I remained completely silent, leaning back in my chair with my hands folded in my lap. I let her continue her pathetic performance without offering a single word of comfort. "Think about our reputation in the community," she sobbed, her voice rising. "We have spent decades building our legacy. We are the standard of excellence for our neighborhood. If Marcus loses his business, and if we lose the family estate, it will be an absolute scandal. Our friends at the country club will completely turn their backs on us. Brittany is threatening to leave Marcus if he cannot provide for her. You are the only one who can fix this disaster, Jada. You have to write a check and save us. It is your duty to protect this family's honor. You owe us for giving you the foundation to become this successful." Her voice echoed through the vast space of my luxurious office. I stared at her, feeling nothing but a cold, profound sense of detachment. She did not care about my well-being. She did not care that I worked tirelessly for years to build this empire completely on my own. She only cared about utilizing my resources to plug the bleeding holes in Marcus's fraudulent life. She wanted me to sacrifice my stability to maintain the fragile illusion of their superiority. Are you entirely finished, Mom? I asked, my voice slicing through the air like a blade. Vivian stopped crying instantly, wiping her eyes with the back of her trembling hand. She nodded slowly, expecting me to pull out a checkbook and blindly submit to her emotional extortion. Good, I stated, picking up a sleek silver pen and casually twirling it between my fingers. Because your performance was exhausting to watch, and I have actual legitimate business to conduct today. I am not giving Marcus a single dime. I am not saving the family estate. You created this disaster by enabling a deeply irresponsible man-child, and you will both suffer the financial consequences of those foolish choices. The artificial sorrow vanished from her face, replaced instantly by raw, unfiltered hatred. She lunged forward, slamming both her hands violently onto my polished desk. "You vindictive, ungrateful little monster!" she screamed, her hair falling wildly around her contorted face. "You have all this wealth and you are just going to watch your brother lose everything. You are going to let us lose the house." "I am not just going to watch Mom." I smiled, a terrifying smile that finally made her realize the gravity of her situation. "I am the one holding the match. You should really leave my property right now before I have building security forcibly remove you." She backed away from my desk, finally understanding that she possessed zero leverage here. She ran out defeated. However, she only made it as far as the heavy oak front door of my penthouse before she froze, her hand hovering over the brass handle. Vivian knew leaving meant returning to a collapsing house of cards. She turned slowly back around, her artificial bravado stripped away. She marched back toward the center of the room, her designer heels clicking against the marble. I remained seated behind my desk, waiting for her inevitable manipulation. "Why are you doing this, Jada?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "Why punish your brother for trying to build something? He takes risks. You work in finance. You should understand businesses take time to become profitable." "I understand exactly how businesses become profitable, Mom," I countered smoothly. "What Marcus is doing is a fraudulent vanity project. He is stealing retirement funds to buy luxury cars for his entitled wife. You know exactly what Marcus is doing, do you not?" She flinched violently. She looked away, her breathing shallow. I pushed harder, refusing to let her hide behind deliberate ignorance. "Admit it," I commanded. "Admit you know your golden boy is a complete financial disaster, dragging this family into absolute ruin just to play pretend." "Of course I know he is struggling," Vivian screamed, throwing her hands up. "I am not an idiot, Jada. I know the cigar club is bleeding money. I know Brittany is spending cash we do not have. But he is a man. Black men face impossible pressures and they need their egos protected. Desmond and I had to support his vision because a man needs to feel like a provider. If his business fails, his marriage will fail, and it will destroy his pride completely." I stared at her in absolute disgust. The depths of her internalized misogyny were genuinely staggering. "So his fragile male ego is worth sacrificing the family estate?" I asked coldly. "That is exactly why you need to step up and pay the loan," she shouted. "You are a single woman. You have no husband to respect, no children to feed, and no legacy to protect. You do not actually need all this money. It is your duty as a daughter to sacrifice your surplus so your brother can maintain his position as head of his household. Women are supposed to sacrifice for the men in their family." I let out a slow, dark chuckle. I reached across my desk and tapped a small control panel hidden into the obsidian surface. A red light blinked twice on the corner of the ceiling. "That is a fascinating perspective on family dynamics, Mom," I said, leaning forward. "And I am glad you articulated it so clearly. My security cameras just recorded every single word of your vile confession. I now have you on video admitting you and Dad deliberately enabled a financial fraud just to protect a mediocre man's ego, while demanding I sacrifice my empire because of my gender and marital status. I am keeping this recording forever. Now, get out of my home before I have the police arrest you for trespassing." Vivian stared at the blinking red light on the ceiling, the color completely draining from her face. She realized her massive, irredeemable mistake. She had just handed me the ultimate ammunition. Without uttering another word, she turned and fled the penthouse, her footsteps echoing frantically until the heavy oak door slammed shut. I was finally alone. I picked up my phone, dialed Julian Sterling's private number, and gave a single definitive instruction. Issue the official notice of default. Do it today. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the crushing wheels of the commercial banking system slammed firmly into motion. Vanguard Equity Holdings did not send a polite email. We sent a specialized, aggressive courier service directly to Desmond's architectural firm, and a secondary courier straight to Marcus's luxury cigar club. The thick, legally binding envelopes required direct verified signatures from both of the men. Desmond was sitting in his drafting room when the courier knocked on the glass door. He signed for the package with a scowl, tearing open the envelope. He pulled out the terrifying notice of default. The text outlined his catastrophic failure to meet the terms of his predatory loan. The document stated that because the payment had been missed, the principal amount, plus compounding interest, was accelerated and due in full within 30 days. If he failed to produce the massive sum, Vanguard Equity Holdings would officially exercise its right to seize the collateral. The family estate would be publicly foreclosed upon and liquidated. Desmond collapsed into his leather desk chair, clutching his chest as cold, paralyzing terror gripped his heart. Across town, Marcus was nursing a severe hangover in the back office of his empty lounge. He had spent the entire morning dodging furious phone calls from unpaid distributors. When the courier handed him the identical package, he ripped it open with trembling hands. He stared at the notice of default, his bloodshot eyes widening in absolute horror. The document listed the severe commercial penalties, the immediate suspension of remaining credit lines, and the impending seizure of business assets. He had absolutely no liquid cash reserves left. He had wired his last operational funds to a luxury travel agency just to keep his demanding wife happy for a few more days. The stark reality of their situation crashed down on both men simultaneously in different parts of the city. The lender was not playing games. They were legally backed into a suffocating corner with no exit strategy. Marcus grabbed his phone with shaking fingers, desperately dialing his father's private number, praying that Desmond had some secret reserve of cash to bail him out one last time. He had absolutely no idea that his father was staring at the exact same financial death sentence, holding the very document that signaled the complete destruction of their family's prestigious legacy. The countdown to their absolute ruin had officially begun, and I held the only clock. The countdown was deafening, but the explosion happened inside Marcus's home. Vanguard Equity Holdings was legally required to send duplicate copies of the default notice to all registered residential addresses. The thick certified envelope arrived on Marcus's doorstep just as Brittany was returning from a lavish champagne brunch. She eagerly snatched the package from the porch, foolishly assuming it contained the VIP itinerary for her upcoming birthday trip to St. Bart's. She tossed her keys onto the entryway table, poured herself a glass of sparkling water, and tore the heavy cardboard open. Instead of glossy brochures and flight confirmations, she pulled out a dense stack of aggressive legal documents stamped with red ink. Brittany stared at the pages, her eyes darting across the legal jargon. Notice of default, immediate asset seizure, $500,000 due in full. The words blurred together, creating a dizzying, nauseating spiral of financial ruin. She saw the signature of his very own father, Desmond, pledging the ancestral family estate as collateral. She saw the staggering compounded interest penalties. The pristine, wealthy illusion she had broadcasted to the entire world was officially dead. She was not married to a successful, brilliant entrepreneur. She was legally tethered to a broke, fraudulent failure who secretly collateralized his parents' home to keep a sinking ship afloat. Her face turned white, her hands trembling violently. 30 minutes later, the front door clicked open. Marcus trudged into the foyer looking completely defeated after his panicked realization at the cigar lounge. He barely had time to remove his designer jacket before a crystal vase sailed through the air, smashing violently against the wall mere inches from his head. Glass shattered in every direction. Marcus jumped back, throwing his hands up in terror. Brittany stood at the edge of the living room, her face contorted into a mask of absolute, unhinged fury. She held the crushed legal documents in her clenched fist, waving them aggressively. You lying, pathetic, worthless fraud, she shrieked, her voice reaching an ear-piercing pitch. You looked me right in the eyes and promised me we were wealthy. You swore your cigar club was turning a massive profit. What is this, Marcus? What is this notice saying? We are $500,000 in debt to some shadow lending company. Marcus panicked, his eyes darting toward the papers. He raised his hands in a desperate, placating gesture. Brittany, baby, please calm down. It is just a temporary cash flow issue. My dad took out a bridge loan. Do not lie to me, Brittany screamed, stepping directly into his personal space. The carefully crafted, polite demeanor she utilized at charity galas evaporated, exposing the venomous entitlement underneath. This is a notice of absolute default. You are broke. You have been using my personal credit cards to buy inventory. I married a successful business owner, not some street hustler running a scam. Your family is a joke. You parody around that country club, bragging about your precious black excellence and your generational wealth, but it is all completely fake. You are all just pretending. Marcus flinched violently, deeply wounded by her calculated racial microaggressions. He had spent his entire life desperately trying to assimilate into her elite white upper-class world, seeking validation through her presence on his arm. To hear her openly mock his family's carefully curated image was a devastating blow to his fragile ego. Brittany, that is incredibly unfair, he stammered, his voice shrinking under her relentless assault. I did all of this for you. I bought you the car. I paid for the trips. I bought you the jewelry. I took these risks for you. I demanded the lifestyle you promised me before we got married. She fired back, devoid of any accountability. I gave up a prominent medical doctor to be with you, because you swore your family had an untouchable financial empire. Now I am holding a foreclosure notice for your parents' house. I am the laughingstock of my social circle. She pointed a sharp finger directly at his chest, her eyes blazing with ruthless determination. I am calling my divorce attorney right now. I am filing for immediate separation, and I will take whatever pennies you have left. No, Brittany, please do not do this, Marcus begged, practically falling to his knees. The mere thought of a scandalous divorce terrified him even more than the impending bankruptcy. He could not stomach the total humiliation of losing his beautiful trophy wife in front of their wealthy peers. Please just give me 24 hours. I can get the money, I swear to you. I will get the money and pay off the commercial loan. I will fix this mess right now. Brittany paused, her hand resting aggressively on her hip. She glared down at him. Because your business accounts are empty. You just told me you cannot even make payroll. Your father already mortgaged the only valuable asset your family owns. Where exactly is $500,000 going to magically come from? Marcus swallowed hard. My dad has a massive retirement portfolio. He has a fully funded 401k from his decades at the architectural firm. It has over $1 million in it. I will make him cash it out completely. Brittany narrowed her eyes, assessing the feasibility of this selfish plan. She did not care if his own father lost his entire life savings. She only cared about securing her financial comfort. You have exactly until tomorrow morning to make him liquidate that retirement account. Brittany commanded, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. You will march over to your father's office and you will force him to drain every penny of his 401k to pay off this debt. If I do not see a zero balance on this default notice by tomorrow afternoon, my lawyer will serve you with divorce papers before dinner. Now clean up this glass and get out of my sight. Marcus did not wait for the sun to fully rise. The threat of Brittany walking out the door with her designer luggage and calling a divorce attorney had completely shattered his remaining composure. He arrived at his father's architectural firm just before 7 in the morning, his clothes rumpled and his eyes wild with sleep deprivation. He barged into Desmond's private office, locking the heavy mahogany door behind him. He collapsed into the leather guest chair and buried his face in his hands. He confessed everything. He told his father about the crushing default notice, the empty business accounts, and Brittany's ruthless ultimatum. Desmond listened in horrifying silence. The older man looked as though he had aged 10 years in a matter of minutes. The illusion of his perfect, successful son was completely dead, replaced by the pathetic reality of a terrified man begging for another massive bailout. Despite the overwhelming evidence of Marcus's utter incompetence, Desmond's deeply ingrained obsession with their social standing overrode his basic financial logic. He could not stomach the idea of a highly public scandalous divorce. He knew exactly how the elite country club members would whisper if Brittany suddenly left Marcus. They would eagerly tear apart their carefully cultivated image of wealthy black excellence. To appease his demanding, entitled white daughter-in-law and protect his own fragile ego, Desmond agreed to commit absolute financial suicide. He picked up his office telephone and dialed his senior wealth management broker. Ignoring the frantic, desperate warnings from his financial advisor, Desmond ordered the immediate total liquidation of his entire retirement portfolio. He completely drained the 401k account he had spent the last 35 years carefully building. The financial penalties for the withdrawal were absolutely devastating. Taxes and severe penalties instantly vaporized hundreds of thousands of dollars before the money even hit his checking account. Desmond did not care about the catastrophic losses. He only cared about silencing Brittany and keeping the fake family empire intact for a little while longer. Within 3 business days, the lump sum of cash finally cleared the banking hurdles and dropped directly into Marcus's commercial business account. For a brief moment, Marcus genuinely thought he was saved. He believed he had successfully outrun the consequences of his actions once again. But he was completely wrong. The massive cash injection did not actually save his failing luxury cigar club. It merely served as a temporary bandage on a gaping, fatal wound. The second the funds registered, Marcus began frantically wiring money in every direction just to put out the most immediate fires. He aggressively paid down the shadow lender to temporarily halt the immediate asset seizure of his parents' home. However, instead of using the remaining capital to restructure his broken business model, he immediately diverted the funds to pacify his furious wife. He paid off Brittany's maxed-out platinum credit cards in full. He settled the outstanding balance on her luxury SUV lease. Within 3 short weeks, the entirety of Desmond's life savings completely evaporated into thin air. The cigar club remained a hollow, failing shell, and Marcus was right back exactly where he started, possessing 0 operational funds and facing a mountain of angry vendors. I watched this pathetic, predictable tragedy unfold from the sanctuary of my penthouse office. Through my firm's advanced financial tracking software, I monitored every single desperate wire transfer Marcus made. I watched him foolishly pour his father's liquidated retirement money into a bottomless pit of debt and designer handbags. It was a masterclass in financial incompetence. My parents had sacrificed their entire future just to delay the inevitable collapse of Marcus's fragile ego. While they were busy frantically moving money around to maintain their fake affluent lifestyle, I was methodically finalizing the legal chains around their necks. My elite team of corporate attorneys at Vanguard Equity Holdings worked relentlessly to process the complex paperwork from the shadow lending acquisition. Julian Sterling personally oversaw the final transfer of the collateralized deed to the ancestral estate. The predatory lenders happily took their guaranteed profit and legally transferred all primary creditor rights directly to my private equity firm. The transition was quiet and deadly. I received the final confirmation email from my lead attorney on a Tuesday afternoon. The massive commercial debt, the brutal compounding interest rates, and the legal right to foreclose on the family estate were now entirely under my control. I downloaded the copies of the legally binding contracts and saved them to my hard drive. I was now officially the sole owner of my family's massive debt. They were no longer dealing with a faceless corporation or a shady shadow lender. They were dealing with the exact daughter they had constantly belittled, exploited, and tried to throw out onto the street. The financial trap was completely secured, and there was absolutely no way out. I printed the final contract on thick parchment paper. I wanted to hold the physical manifestation of my victory in my hands. The printer hummed softly, a stark contrast to the loud chaos I knew was consuming Marcus's household. I walked over to the tray, picked up the warm sheets, and read the bold text. It clearly designated my private equity firm as the undisputed holder of their financial future. Every arrogant remark my father ever made about my supposed lack of ambition flashed through my mind. Every cruel insult Brittany ever threw my way echoed in my ears. They had spent my entire life attempting to convince me that I was a worthless background character. They forced me to endure endless humiliation just to elevate Marcus. Now the tables were violently turned. I ran my fingertips over the embossed signature line, feeling an intoxicating sense of absolute power. I poured a cold glass of water, walked toward the windows, and looked out over the city. I held their complete destruction in the palm of my hand, and I was going to enjoy every second of their impending collapse. The very next morning, I eagerly initiated the systematic dismantling of Marcus's fraudulent operations. I woke up before dawn watching the vibrant city sunrise paint the skyline, completely ready to execute my next calculated move. As the undisputed holder of the commercial debt, Vanguard Equity Holdings possessed absolute legal authority to enforce immediate compliance checks on the collateralized business. I dispatched a specialized team of ruthless forensic auditors directly to the luxury cigar club. I hired a private firm known for their complete lack of mercy. They were instructed to tear apart every ledger, inspect physical inventory, and document every discrepancy they found. I leaned back in my heavy leather executive chair, watching the GPS tracking monitor on my secure computer screen as their black vehicles smoothly pulled into the crowded parking lot. I took a sip of my dark roast coffee, feeling a sharp thrill of anticipation. Marcus was about to experience real corporate accountability. At precisely 10 o'clock in the morning, three auditors dressed in sharp charcoal suits walked confidently through the glass double doors of the cigar club. The lead auditor, a stoic and uncompromising man named Mr. Harrison, approached the mahogany host stand. Marcus was lounging on a velvet sofa in the main lounge area, aggressively scrolling through his phone while ignoring a massive stack of past-due invoices resting on the coffee table. He looked up, clearly annoyed by the sudden intrusion. Mr. Harrison unzipped his leather briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of legally binding authorization documents, and slapped them onto the polished wood counter. He announced that they represented the primary creditor and were there to conduct a mandatory audit of all physical and liquid assets. Marcus jumped up from the sofa, his face draining of all color. He frantically tried to block their path to the back office, stammering out weak excuses. Mr. Harrison pushed past him, stating that failure to comply with a creditor audit was a direct violation of the loan covenants and would result in immediate police intervention. The auditors moved through the establishment with terrifying efficiency. They demanded total access to the point-of-sale systems, the digital accounting software, and the physical inventory storage rooms. Marcus stood in the center of the lounge, sweating profusely through his expensive designer shirt. He watched in absolute horror as the financial professionals meticulously photographed the depleted stock of premium cigars and half-empty bottles of top-shelf liquor. Harrison sat down at Marcus's desk and began pulling up the commercial bank statements. The digital footprint of Marcus's rampant embezzlement was glaringly obvious. The auditor systematically highlighted massive unauthorized cash withdrawals wired directly to luxury travel agencies and high-end automotive dealerships. He cross-referenced the depleted business accounts with the unpaid vendor invoices stacked on the desk. The financial reality of the club was not just poor management. It was a brazen ongoing theft. Marcus paced the floor, his breathing becoming shallow and erratic as the walls closed in around his fake empire. Driven by blind panic and his typical delusion that he could charm his way out of any consequence, Marcus attempted a remarkably stupid maneuver. He walked over to the climate-controlled humidor and pulled out a highly exclusive box of imported Cuban cigars. He grabbed a rare bottle of aged scotch from the top shelf of the fully stocked bar. He approached Mr. Harrison, pasting a fake, desperate smile onto his sweating face. Marcus set the expensive items down next to the auditor's laptop. He lowered his voice, attempting to sound like a smooth businessman negotiating a casual deal. He begged Mr. Harrison to overlook the massive financial discrepancies. He explicitly offered the auditor thousands of dollars in free merchandise and promised a lifetime VIP membership if he would just write a favorable compliance report. He pleaded with the man to hide the unauthorized withdrawals, claiming he just needed a few more weeks to secure a new round of silent investments to replace the missing capital. Mr. Harrison ignored the scotch. He did not even look at the expensive cigars. He simply reached into his tailored suit pocket, pulled out his smartphone, and stopped the covert audio recording he had legally initiated the moment Marcus started speaking. He looked Marcus directly in the eyes and informed him that attempting to bribe a certified financial auditor during a default compliance check was a severe documented breach of the commercial lending agreement. He packed up his heavy laptop, gathered his printed evidence, and walked out of the club without uttering another word. Marcus chased after them into the sunlit parking lot, practically begging on his knees, but the auditors simply got into their vehicles and drove away. 10 minutes later, my secure private office line rang. I answered immediately. Mr. Harrison delivered a concise, highly detailed summary of the disastrous encounter. He confirmed that the business was completely insolvent, the inventory was heavily depleted, and the owner had explicitly attempted commercial bribery. I listened to the clear audio recording of Marcus desperately begging for his life, offering cheap cigars in exchange for corporate fraud. A cold, victorious smile spread across my face. Marcus had just handed me the absolute ultimate weapon. The original commercial loan agreement contained a very specific ironclad morality and compliance clause. Any documented attempt to defraud, deceive, or bribe an agent of the primary creditor automatically nullified every single remaining grace period or mediation requirement. It granted the debt holder the immediate, uncontested legal right to accelerate the foreclosure process at maximum speed. I thanked Mr. Harrison for his incredibly thorough, excellent work and ended the phone call immediately. I immediately forwarded the digital audio file and the preliminary audit findings to my lead corporate attorney. I instructed my legal team to draft the final aggressive acceleration notices. Marcus had completely destroyed his only remaining shield. The slow squeeze was officially over. It was time to rip the foundation out from under them forever. The state government struck the first fatal blow before my lawyers even mailed the acceleration notices. Bureaucracy operates slowly, but when it moves, it crushes everything in its path. Marcus had been dodging his commercial taxes for 8 consecutive months. He foolishly assumed the Department of Revenue would simply overlook a luxury cigar club operating in an upscale zip code. He treated his tax obligations with the exact same arrogance he applied to his unpaid vendors. That massive arrogance officially expired on a cloudy Thursday afternoon. 2 agents from the State Liquor Control Board walked into the Sovereign Leaf accompanied by a local police officer. They did not ask for a meeting. They taped a massive bright orange suspension notice directly over the top-shelf liquor display. Marcus was stripped of his commercial liquor license immediately. A cigar club that cannot legally serve alcohol to its wealthy patrons is functionally dead. Word spread through the city. The elite clientele Marcus had spent years desperately trying to impress walked out the glass doors and never returned. His fake empire collapsed into dust. The public humiliation absolutely broke him. Marcus did not blame his reckless spending, his embezzlement, or his refusal to pay taxes. Instead, fueled by my mother's toxic narrative, he directed all of his blinding rage entirely toward me. In his fragile mind, I was the sole reason his life was falling apart. He spent the entire afternoon sitting alone in the dark office of his shuttered club, drinking heavily from an opened bottle of premium bourbon. The alcohol amplified his entitlement and erased his remaining shreds of basic common sense. He decided he was going to force me to fix his disaster. Around 9 o'clock that evening, I was sitting in my living room reviewing the final foreclosure documents on my secure tablet when my internal security panel flared to life. Marcus had somehow managed to bypass the downstairs concierge. My tablet screen switched automatically to the hallway camera feed. Marcus stumbled out of the elevator, his designer suit soaked with rain. His face was twisted into an ugly, furious sneer. He marched directly toward the heavy, custom oak double doors of my penthouse. He did not politely ring the doorbell. He immediately balled his hands into tight fists and began pounding violently against the solid wood. The heavy thuds echoed loudly through my quiet living room. "Jada!" Marcus screamed. His voice was thick and slurred with alcohol carrying through the thick oak doors. "Open this door right now, I know you are in there. You are going to fix this mess. You are going to write me a check, and you are going to save my business." I did not move from my plush velvet sofa. I simply picked up my tablet, watching him completely unravel in high definition. He kicked the bottom of the door, leaving a scuff mark on the polished wood. "Do you hear me?" he yelled, his voice cracking with pure desperation. "The state shut me down. They took my license. Brittany is packing her bags right now. You ruined my life. You have millions of dollars sitting in your bank accounts, and you are just watching your own brother drown. Open the door and give me my money. You owe me. You owe this family." He pounded both fists against the door again, breathing heavily, entirely consumed by his pathetic victim complex. He genuinely believed that my money belonged to him by divine right. He expected me to open the door, dry his tears, and hand over a fortune just because we shared the same last name. I felt absolutely nothing for the drunken, screaming man on my screen. I did not feel pity. I did not feel guilt. I just felt a profound sense of validation. Strip away the stolen money and the artificial praise, and all that remained was a weak, entitled bully throwing a tantrum. I did not walk to the door. I did not engage in a screaming match through the wood. I tapped the red emergency icon on my security application. It connected me directly to the building's private security director. "Director," I said calmly, maintaining absolute professional distance. "There is an intoxicated, aggressive man attempting to break down the front doors of my penthouse. He bypassed your lobby protocols. I want him removed from the premises immediately. Do not be gentle." "Right away, Miss Henderson," the security director replied, his tone sharp with urgency. "My team is heading up the service elevator now." I kept my eyes locked on the digital camera feed. Marcus raised his foot to kick the door a third time, but the service elevator chimed loudly at the end of the hallway. 3 towering security guards in dark uniforms stepped out, moving with terrifying speed and precision. Marcus turned around, his drunken bravado faltering as the large men quickly surrounded him. The lead guard grabbed Marcus by his expensive lapels and slammed him firmly against the hallway wall. The impact knocked the breath completely out of his lungs. "Get your hands off me!" Marcus sputtered, struggling weakly against their iron grip. "I am her brother. I have a right to be here." "You are trespassing on private property, sir," the lead guard stated coldly. The guards twisted Marcus's arms behind his back, subduing him in seconds. They marched him toward the service elevator. Marcus kicked and thrashed, screaming my name, but his protests were completely muffled as the steel doors slid shut. I watched the camera feed return to the quiet, empty hallway. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. The security team dragged him out into the pouring rain and tossed him onto the wet pavement of the city streets like common garbage. I was entirely locked out of my world. The physical confrontation was completely finished, but the final devastating financial blow was rapidly approaching. My father Desmond's milestone 60th birthday was now only a few short days away. Desmond's milestone 60th birthday was an event my parents had been meticulously planning for over a full year. Even with their financial foundation rapidly crumbling into dust, Vivian absolutely refused to cancel the celebration. In her delusional mind, canceling the party meant admitting defeat to the elite social circles she so desperately clung to. Instead of scaling back, she aggressively doubled down. She booked the grand ballroom at the most exclusive, astronomically expensive country club in the state. She hired a 12-piece orchestra, ordered imported floral centerpieces that cost more than most people's annual salaries, and secured a lavish menu featuring Wagyu beef and white truffles. The blinding audacity of her reckless spending was staggering. She was actively bleeding the last remaining drops of credit they possessed to throw a fake celebration for a man who had secretly signed away their ancestral home. It was a breathtaking display of financial suicide. Brittany, despite her recent violent tantrums and aggressive threats of immediate divorce, happily played along with the expensive charade. The opportunity to wear a custom designer gown and sip vintage champagne while looking down on other attendees was simply too tempting for her fragile ego to pass up. She paused her screaming matches to focus entirely on her hair and styling appointments. They were all collectively engaging in a terrifying masterclass of psychological denial. They firmly believed that if they smiled brightly enough for the high society photographers, the impending commercial foreclosure and the massive mountain of predatory debt would magically disappear into thin air. They wanted to project absolute black excellence to their wealthy peers, completely ignoring the toxic, rotting reality festering right underneath their polished surface. They were dancing merrily on the edge of an absolute cliff. The heavy gold-embossed invitation arrived at my penthouse via a specialized uniformed courier. I pulled the thick cardstock from the envelope and stared at the elegant calligraphy spelling out my name. I had honestly assumed that after I completely humiliated them at the charity gala and had my private security team throw a drunken Marcus out onto the wet pavement, I would be permanently banned from all future family events. Yet here was a formal, highly prioritized invitation explicitly requesting my presence at the prestigious head table. I knew my mother better than anyone else in the world. Vivian did not do anything out of the goodness of her heart. Every action she took was a carefully calculated, highly strategic move on a complicated chessboard. She did not want me there to celebrate my father. She wanted me there because I was their absolute last remaining financial lifeline, and she had devised a new, incredibly sinister way to force my hand. She was preparing to play her final, most desperate card. I walked over to my desk and activated my secure computer terminal. I did not just manage distressed debt, I gathered valuable corporate intelligence. I reached out to a few highly placed contacts within the country club's administrative staff. A generous, entirely anonymous donation to the club's employee scholarship fund easily loosened a few important tongues. The senior catering manager confirmed my darkest, most cynical suspicions. Vivian had not just booked a standard dinner. She had arranged for a highly publicized ceremonial moment immediately following the main course. She planned to have a local notary public deliberately disguised as a standard party guest standing by the head table. My parents had quietly utilized their remaining legal connections to draft a comprehensive, legally binding financial guarantor document. The paperwork was specifically designed to legally tether my personal assets and my future earnings directly to Marcus's failing commercial business loans. Their manipulative plan was actually quite simple, yet entirely diabolical in its execution. They intended to ambush me right in the middle of the lavish birthday dinner. Desmond was going to stand up in front of 200 of their most powerful elite friends, corporate colleagues, and community leaders. He was going to give a highly emotional, deeply manipulative speech about the vital importance of family unity, generational wealth, and supporting struggling Black entrepreneurs. Then, while the entire ballroom was watching and clapping, he was going to publicly present the guarantor document to me. He was going to frame it as a beautiful symbolic gesture of my ultimate loyalty to the family legacy. They were banking heavily on my lifelong habit of remaining quiet and obedient. They fully believed that the intense, suffocating social pressure of the upper-class community would absolutely paralyze me. They thought I would be too terrified of creating a massive public scandal to refuse their aggressive demand. They assumed I would just smile, pick up the pen, and sign away my financial freedom to avoid embarrassing them in front of the entire elite country club. I stared at the gold-embossed invitation resting on my desk, letting out a cold, sharp laugh that echoed through the penthouse. The sheer arrogance required to orchestrate such a massive trap was almost impressive. They genuinely believed they could bully me into submission, using the very same societal judgment they had used to keep me down my entire life. They wanted to corner me in a room full of millionaires and force me to bail out a common thief. What they completely failed to realize was that I no longer feared the judgment of their superficial peers. I did not care about maintaining their fake, crumbling facade. I picked up my phone and sent a swift, decisive message to my lead corporate attorney. I instructed him to prepare the final official foreclosure and eviction notices for both the cigar club and the ancestral estate. I told him to print them on the highest quality legal paper we possessed. If my family wanted to use a massive, luxurious birthday party to publicly ambush me. I was happy to oblige them. I would RSVP yes and bring a gift they would never forget. The resulting explosion would be absolutely spectacular. The chandeliers of the country club cast a golden glow over the grand ballroom, illuminating a scene of absolute manufactured perfection. I stepped through the heavy mahogany doors, wearing a custom deep sapphire silk gown that pooled elegantly around my heels. I carried a sleek black leather briefcase. It was an unusual accessory for a formal gala, but it was the most important item in the room. The ballroom was packed with 200 of my parents' elite peers. High-profile politicians, wealthy surgeons, and prominent local business owners mingled over towers of imported champagne and silver platters of caviar. The sheer financial desperation required to throw a party of this magnitude while actively facing commercial foreclosure was truly breathtaking to witness. My mother Vivian was holding court near the center of the room, draped in heavily sequined silver fabric. She spotted me immediately. Her fake practice smile remained plastered on her face, but her eyes darkened with a mix of triumph and vicious anticipation. She genuinely thought I was walking directly into her trap. I glided through the crowded room, offering polite smiles to the aunts and uncles who whispered as I passed by. Brittany and Marcus stood near the main stage, looking tense. Marcus was sweating through his tuxedo, downing a glass of whiskey. Brittany glared at my gown, her lips pressed into a thin line. I ignored their hostile stares and found my assigned seat at a prominent table directly in front of the main stage. I set my briefcase onto the floor, resting it against my ankles. The string orchestra finished their set, and the waitstaff began clearing the dessert plates. The ambient chatter slowly faded as the lighting shifted, focusing a spotlight directly onto the center podium. It was finally time for the main event. My father Desmond walked up the carpeted steps to the stage, adjusting his silk bow tie with an air of absolute manufactured authority. The room erupted into applause for the birthday honoree. Desmond grabbed the silver microphone, looking out over the sea of wealthy, expectant faces. He offered a wide, charismatic smile that masked the terrifying reality of his total financial ruin. He began his speech by thanking his distinguished friends for their decades of support, pivoting seamlessly into a deeply manipulative monologue about the fundamental pillars of our community. He spoke passionately about Black excellence, generational wealth, and the heavy burdens of leadership. Then, his tone shifted. The warm, inviting cadence of his voice morphed into something cold, sharp, and highly aggressive. He gripped the edges of the wooden podium, directing his gaze entirely toward my table. Building a lasting legacy requires absolute, unwavering loyalty, my father announced, his voice echoing loudly through the silent ballroom. It requires a family to stand united to protect one another against the harsh realities of the business world. Unfortunately, not everyone understands the sacred value of that unity. Some individuals achieve a small measure of personal success and immediately forget the very people who gave them their foundation. We live in a world infected by deep, toxic selfishness. We see children who refuse to support their own siblings, children who hoard their wealth while their family members fight to build something meaningful for the community. A collective, uncomfortable murmur rippled through the 200 guests. Elite socialites shifted awkwardly in their seats, exchanging shocked, confused glances. Publicly airing family grievances at a formal birthday gala was a massive breach of high society etiquette. My father did not care. He was completely blinded by his desperate, obsessive need to save Marcus. He reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a thick, legally binding document folded neatly in half. He slammed the papers forcefully onto the top of the wooden podium. I am 60 years old today, and I have to make hard protective decisions about the future of my estate. Desmond continued, his eyes locked furiously onto mine. I cannot in good conscience leave my hard-earned ancestral wealth to a daughter who possesses absolutely no loyalty or sense of community. Jada, I am speaking directly to you. You have shown a profound, deeply disappointing lack of respect for your brother Marcus. You have refused to support his commercial endeavors, and you have turned your back on this family when we simply asked for your basic cooperation. The entire ballroom turned to stare at me, 200 pairs of wealthy, judgmental eyes bore down on my table. The suffocating, heavy social pressure they had carefully engineered was fully deployed. They wanted me to feel completely trapped, isolated, and entirely terrified of the public humiliation. They genuinely thought the overwhelming weight of their collective judgment would force me into total obedience. "I have a legal guarantor document resting right here on this podium," my father declared, tapping the papers aggressively. "This document legally binds your financial assets to support your brother's business. It is a pledge of absolute loyalty. I am officially announcing in front of all our closest friends and peers that I am cutting you out of my will forever. You will not receive a single penny of my estate, and you will no longer be considered a part of this family unless you stand up from that chair, walk up to this podium, and sign these guarantor papers right now." The silence in the grand ballroom was absolutely deafening. Nobody dared to take a single breath. My mother, Vivian, crossed her arms tightly over her chest, staring down at me with a victorious, arrogant smirk. Brittany leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with malicious delight. They honestly believed they had checkmated me. They thought I would crumble under the devastating weight of public shame and obediently sign away my entire financial empire to protect their fake legacy. I did not break a sweat. I did not shed a single tear. I simply reached down, grabbed the handle of my sleek leather briefcase, and stood up from my chair with absolute flawless confidence. Before I could take a full step toward the center stage, the shrill squeal of microphone feedback echoed through the grand ballroom. Brittany had practically sprinted across the elevated platform, her pastel designer gown swishing aggressively around her ankles. She snatched the silver microphone directly from my father's hands. Desmond did not stop her. He actually stepped back with a supportive nod, perfectly willing to let his daughter-in-law act as his ultimate attack dog in front of their wealthy peers. Brittany gripped the microphone tightly with both of her manicured hands, leaning over the wooden podium with a vicious smile plastered across her face. "Let us be completely honest with ourselves for just one moment," Brittany announced. Her voice dripped with an artificial sugary sweetness that barely masked the toxic venom underneath. "We all know exactly why Jada is acting out like this. We all know why she is being so incredibly stubborn and difficult tonight. It is because she is 33 years old, single, and completely alone." A collective gasp rippled through the front tables. Brittany ignored the shocked reactions basking in the spotlight. "Jada has spent her entire adult life sitting on the sidelines." Brittany continued, her tone growing sharper and more malicious with every single word. "She has never experienced the beautiful, selfless love of a devoted husband. She has no children to care for. Because of her unfortunate single status, she has become incredibly bitter. She is totally consumed by jealousy whenever she looks at Marcus and me. She simply cannot comprehend true family values because she has never managed to build a family of her own. She is completely incapable of understanding the sacrifices required to maintain a prestigious legacy like ours." Brittany paced across the stage, addressing the 200 elite guests, as if she were delivering a keynote speech on morality. "Desmond and Vivian have given her absolutely everything. They provided her with a roof when she had nowhere else to go. And how does she repay their endless generosity? By hoarding her corporate paycheck and refusing to help her brother when his business needs a temporary boost. It is not just selfish. It is a complete disgrace to the foundational principles of community and shared success that this country club represents." The heavy, suffocating silence in the ballroom fractured into 100 hushed conversations. Wealthy socialites leaned across their tables behind their crystal champagne flutes, whispering rapidly to one another. I could feel their judgmental eyes burning into my skin. In their elite world, a single woman in her 30s was already viewed with heavy suspicion. Brittany was brilliantly weaponizing their deeply ingrained societal prejudices against me. She was expertly painting me as a lonely, vindictive spinster who was actively trying to destroy a beautiful, loving family out of sheer, unadulterated spite. Desmond stood behind Brittany, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride. He looked incredibly satisfied with her ruthless character assassination. My mother Vivian was seated a few tables away, dabbing at her dry eyes with a silk napkin, playing the role of the heartbroken, long-suffering matriarch to absolute perfection. They had orchestrated this entire public execution to break my spirit entirely. They fully expected me to burst into humiliated tears, drop my head in shame, and beg for forgiveness. They were waiting for me to run up to that podium, sign the guarantor documents, and surrender my entire financial future just to stop the vicious public humiliation. I did not break. I did not falter. I gripped the leather handle of my briefcase and stepped away from my table. The heavy sapphire silk of my custom designer gown brushed softly against the polished marble floor as I began my deliberate walk toward the main stage. The hushed whispers of the elite crowd immediately died down. The entire ballroom held its collective breath, watching my every move. They were waiting for the spectacular, messy, emotional breakdown. They were waiting for the defeated, apologetic daughter to surrender to the overwhelming pressure of her powerful family. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my shoulders pulled back and chin held high. I did not rush my steps. I moved with the slow, predatory grace of a woman who held every single winning card in the entire deck. As I passed the lavishly decorated tables, I made direct, unflinching eye contact with several of my father's most prominent business associates. They quickly looked away, deeply uncomfortable with the intense, unbothered confidence radiating from me. I reached the carpeted stairs of the elevated stage. I walked up the steps with absolute flawless precision. Brittany was still standing behind the wooden podium, clutching the microphone tightly. As I approached her, the smug, victorious smile on her face began to slowly fracture. She expected to see a broken, humiliated woman. Instead, she was looking at an absolute financial titan dressed in sapphire silk. I stopped directly in front of her. I did not say a single word. I simply extended my right hand palm open, waiting. Brittany hesitated, her eyes darting nervously toward my father for guidance. Desmond gave her a sharp, encouraging nod, firmly believing that I had finally come to sign his predatory guarantor documents. Reluctantly, Brittany loosened her grip and handed the microphone over to me. She took a quick, nervous step backward, retreating into my father's shadow. I stepped up to the center of the podium. I placed my sleek black leather briefcase down onto the smooth surface right next to the massive stack of legally binding guarantor paperwork my father had prepared. I adjusted the microphone stand, ensuring my voice would project perfectly across the massive, opulent ballroom. I looked out over the sea of 200 wealthy, expectant faces. Then I turned my head slowly and looked directly at Desmond. I offered him the warmest, brightest, most genuine smile I had ever given him in my entire life. The ultimate reckoning had officially arrived. "Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, Dad," I said. My voice echoed with crystal clarity through the sound system washing over the dead silent ballroom. "And thank you for publicly confirming that I am officially removed from your last will and testament. You have no idea how much time and legal paperwork that saves my attorneys tomorrow morning." Desmond frowned, a deep crease forming between his brows. He looked down at the guarantor documents he had slammed onto the podium, then back up at my face. He was trying to process why his ultimate weapon of social destruction had completely failed to break my spirit. "You see, Dad, the concept of a last will and testament only matters if you actually possess valuable assets to leave behind," I continued pleasantly. "You cannot bequeath property that no longer belongs to you, and as of 48 hours ago, you do not own a single thing." I gripped the polished silver clasps of my sleek black briefcase. The sharp metallic clicks of the latches snapping open echoed through the microphone, sounding like a judge's gavel striking a wooden block. I flipped the top open. I reached inside and pulled out two densely packed stacks of legally binding financial documents. I lifted the heavy stacks and slapped them down directly on top of Desmond's useless guarantor paperwork. The thud made my father jump backward in shock. "Allow me to officially reintroduce myself," I announced, turning my gaze toward the sea of wealthy, captivated guests. "My family has always told you that I am just a struggling corporate wealth management advisor. That was a necessary fiction. My name is Jada Henderson, and I am the founder and sole chief executive officer of Vanguard Equity Holdings." We are a premier private equity firm managing over $50 million in assets, specializing specifically in acquiring highly distressed commercial debt. A collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. Several prominent bankers and real estate moguls in the audience sat up straight. My mother Vivian dropped her champagne flute. It shattered against the marble floor, splashing expensive wine across her designer gown, but she was too paralyzed by shock to even notice. I turned and locked eyes with my brother. Marcus was standing near the edge of the stage, sweating profusely under the bright venue lights. "Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously sharp register. "You missed your absolutely critical commercial loan repayment because you wired $15,000 to a luxury travel agency for Brittany's birthday vacation. When you defaulted on that high-risk mezzanine loan, the primary creditor gained the immediate, uncontested legal right to seize all collateralized assets. I am that primary creditor. My firm legally purchased your massive toxic debt portfolio." I picked up the first stack of legal documents and shoved them directly into Marcus's trembling chest. He instinctively caught the thick papers, staring down at the bright red ink in horror. "Consider yourself legally served, Marcus," I stated firmly into the microphone. "That is a formal court-ordered commercial eviction notice. You have exactly 48 hours to completely vacate the premises of the Luxury Cigar Club. On Monday morning, my private security contractors will arrive to permanently change the locks, seize all remaining physical inventory, and liquidate the business assets to satisfy your massive corporate deficit. Your fake empire is officially dead." Marcus let out a pathetic, suffocated wheeze. His knees buckled slightly, and he leaned heavily against the stage to keep from collapsing onto the floor. Brittany let out a blood-curdling shriek, finally comprehending the brutal reality that her glamorous lifestyle had just been entirely eradicated. I immediately turned my unwavering focus back to Desmond. My father was hyperventilating, his hands gripping the wooden podium so tightly that his knuckles turned stark white. The arrogant patriarch was replaced by a terrified old man who realized he had marched his family into a financial slaughterhouse. "And Dad," I continued, picking up the second thicker stack of legal documents from the podium, "when you secretly secured that predatory commercial loan to save Marcus's failing business, you recklessly used our sprawling ancestral family estate as the sole collateral. You foolishly signed away the deed to the very house our family has owned for generations, blinding yourself to the risks just to protect your golden child's fragile ego. Because Marcus definitively defaulted on that loan, the collateral has been officially forfeited to the primary debt holder." I slammed the thick stack of papers against Desmond's chest. He stumbled backward, clutching the documents with shaking, panicked hands. "Consider yourself legally served, Desmond," I declared, my voice echoing like thunder across the massive room. "That is an official notice of foreclosure. The family estate no longer belongs to you. It belongs entirely to Vanguard Equity Holdings. You and Mom have exactly 30 days to pack up your personal belongings and vacate the premises completely. If you are not entirely moved out by the end of the month, I will have the local sheriff's department forcibly remove you and toss your possessions out onto the front lawn." The country club erupted into unprecedented chaos. 200 elite guests burst into frantic shouting. Men in tailored tuxedos aggressively whispered to their wives, pulling out their smartphones to text the scandalous news. The flawlessly curated image of my family's black excellence had been violently obliterated in less than 5 minutes. They were exposed as absolute frauds, drowning in debt, losing their businesses and homes because of their own greed. My mother let out a hysterical sob from her table, burying her face in her trembling hands. Brittany was screaming at Marcus at the top of her lungs, hitting his shoulder with her handbag, calling him a worthless liar. Desmond stared down at the foreclosure stamp on the legal papers in absolute devastation. I had dismantled their universe. They spent my life trying to make me feel small, but I was the one who finally broke them. The sheer weight of my declaration crushed the remaining oxygen out of the room. For a fraction of a second, nobody moved. Then the collective realization of my family's absolute financial ruin hit the country club like a physical shockwave. The prominent doctors, corporate lawyers, and local politicians who had just been applauding my father's arrogant speech were now staring at him with unmasked visceral disgust. In this hyper-competitive circle of elite society, struggling quietly was considered a personal failing. However, dragging your prestigious peers into a lavish, incredibly expensive celebration, funded entirely by fraudulent defaulted commercial debt, was the ultimate unforgivable betrayal. The regional president of the charity foundation, the very same woman my mother had desperately tried to impress all evening, was the first to move. She set her champagne flute down onto a silver tray. She did not say a word of farewell. She simply turned her back on the head table and walked toward the exit doors. That silent action broke the dam. It was an immediate social exodus. One by one, the guests stood up from their decorated tables. They collected their bags and jackets. They murmured to each other in harsh whispers, avoiding any eye contact with Desmond or Vivian. The mass abandonment was swift and complete. "Wait, please!" Vivian cried out, her voice cracking as she watched her carefully curated social empire disintegrating right in front of her eyes. "This is just a horrible misunderstanding. Jada is just confused." Nobody stopped walking. The only person left screaming was Brittany. She whipped her head away from the retreating guests and locked her furious, tear-filled eyes onto her husband. The flawless, supportive wife facade entirely melted away, exposing the vicious, entitled core underneath. "You absolute pathetic loser!" Brittany shrieked, her voice echoing across the emptying ballroom. She shoved Marcus forcefully in the chest. "You looked me in the eye this morning and promised me that your father was handling the bank. You swore to me that my lifestyle was completely secure. I gave up my youth to marry into this supposed elite family, and you are literally homeless. You have nothing. You are nothing." "Brittany, baby, please do not do this right now," Marcus begged. Tears streamed down his face. He reached out with trembling hands. "I can fix this. I just need to talk to the lawyers. I can negotiate with her. Please just calm down." "Do not touch me," she screamed, swatting his hands away, as if his very touch was physically repulsive. She took a step back, her chest heaving with pure, unadulterated rage. "There is absolutely no fixing this, Marcus. Your business is being seized on Monday morning. Your parents are being thrown out of their house. You are a complete, irredeemable fraud. I will not let you drag my reputation down into the gutter with your pathetic fake legacy. I am done. I am entirely, completely done with you." With a swift, aggressive motion, Brittany reached for her left hand. She grabbed the massive diamond engagement ring and the platinum wedding band that Marcus had foolishly purchased. She violently yanked the rings off her finger. Without a single ounce of hesitation, she threw the heavy jewelry directly at his face. The diamond hit Marcus squarely in the forehead before clattering across the marble floor. "I am calling my divorce attorney right now," Brittany hissed, stepping over the discarded rings. "Do not even bother coming back to the rental house tonight. I am packing all of my designer clothes and leaving. You can go sleep in your empty, pathetic cigar club before they change the locks." She spun around and stormed down the center aisle. She did not look back at her sobbing husband or offer a single word to her horrified in-laws. She simply marched out the heavy wooden doors, aggressively dialing her smartphone before she even crossed the threshold of the country club. The sound of her heels clicking against the tile faded into the distance. The grand ballroom was now just a hollow, echoing cavern. The 12-piece orchestra had quietly packed up their instruments and slipped out the back exit. The waitstaff stood frozen near the kitchen doors, unsure of how to handle the catastrophic meltdown occurring at the head table. Desmond collapsed heavily into his dining chair. The arrogant, commanding patriarch who had tried to bully me into financial submission was completely gone. He stared blankly at the bright red foreclosure stamp on the legal documents resting on his lap. He had gambled his entire life savings to protect a son who was currently crying on the floor. Desmond's hands shook very violently. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some kind of excuse or demand, but no words came out. The crushing weight of his monumental failure had finally broken him. Vivian remained glued to her seat, openly sobbing into her hands. The glittering silver sequins of her expensive dress caught the light, creating a sickening contrast to the absolute misery radiating from her. She had spent her entire existence obsessing over what other people thought of her. She had willingly sacrificed her daughter's mental and financial well-being just to maintain a fragile illusion of wealth. Now she was left completely stripped bare. Every single person she had ever tried to impress had walked out on her. She had no country club status left. She had no home left. She was entirely ruined. Marcus slowly slid down the side of the wooden podium. He collapsed onto the cold marble floor, pulling his knees up to his chest. The golden child of the Henderson family buried his face in his arms, his shoulders shaking with loud, uncontrollable sobs. He had lost his fake business, his trophy wife, and his parents' house in a matter of minutes. He was a broken, terrified boy, trapped in a grown man's ruined life. I stood silently watching their absolute devastation unfold. I offered them no words of comfort. There were no dramatic apologies or tearful reconciliations waiting at the end of this night. I ignored the frantic yelling echoing behind me. The valet rushed to open the heavy glass doors of the club, stepping aside quickly as I made my exit. I turned away from the shattered remnants of my family, walked calmly out of the grand ballroom, and stepped into the cool, refreshing night air. My black town car was waiting by the curb. Julian held the door open for me, his expression a mixture of profound respect and quiet awe. As the driver pulled away from the country club, I did not look back at the grand columns or the valet stand. I was officially finished playing their twisted, toxic game. The weekend passed in a blur of absolute silence from my parents. They did not attempt to call or text. They knew they possessed zero leverage, and reality was rapidly setting in. Monday morning arrived with the brutal, unforgiving efficiency of the American legal system. At precisely 8 o'clock, my private security contractors arrived at the Sovereign Leaf, accompanied by local law enforcement. Marcus was actually sleeping on the leather sofa in his back office exactly as Brittany had commanded. The officers woke him up, handed him his eviction paperwork, and gave him exactly 15 minutes to gather his personal items. He tried to argue, begging the contractors for just one more day, but my team operated with zero mercy. They physically escorted him out the front doors and immediately began changing the commercial locks. By noon, a specialized liquidation crew had completely stripped the luxury lounge bare. They auctioned off the custom leather furniture, the imported humidors, and the remaining high-end inventory to the highest commercial bidders. The funds were immediately redirected to satisfy a fraction of his massive outstanding corporate deficit. Marcus's fake, glamorous empire was entirely erased from existence before the sun even set. He stood on the sidewalk watching his dream vanish. The golden child finally experienced the brutal reality of actual consequences without a safety net to catch his fall. The foreclosure on the ancestral family estate proceeded with the exact same level of ruthless precision. Desmond and Vivian utilized the entire 30-day eviction window, desperately trying to find a legal loophole. They exhausted their last remaining social connections, begging wealthy friends for a massive bailout loan. Every single person turned them down flat. The elite society they had sacrificed everything to impress wanted absolutely nothing to do with their radioactive financial ruin. On the 30th day, a moving truck arrived to pack up their remaining possessions. They were forced to downsize into a cramped, unremarkable two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, miles away from the affluent neighborhoods they once ruled. I did not keep their precious, sprawling estate. I felt absolutely no sentimental attachment to the house that had served as my childhood prison. I immediately sold the massive property to an aggressive commercial real estate developer. The sale was finalized rapidly, stripping away the very last remaining piece of their prestigious, arrogant legacy. They were no longer the kings and queens of their carefully curated high society chessboard. The developer planned to completely bulldoze the historic mansion and replace it with a highly profitable modern luxury condominium complex. The sale generated an absolutely massive astronomical return on my initial distressed debt investment. Vanguard Equity Holdings processed the multi-million-dollar transaction, officially closing out my family's financial portfolio forever. I took my immense, newly acquired profits and immediately redirected a highly significant portion into a cause that actually mattered. I established a comprehensive, fully funded financial foundation specifically designed to support brilliant, driven minority women entering the competitive world of private equity and corporate finance. I wanted to ensure that other intelligent, capable Black women had the resources and backing to build their own empires without ever having to rely on toxic, patriarchal family structures that only sought to exploit their hard work and dedication. I set up a board of directors comprised of fierce, successful female leaders who shared my exact vision. We provided massive grants, comprehensive mentorship programs, and crucial seed capital to minority female founders who were historically ignored by traditional lending institutions. This foundation would ensure my personal wealth created lasting, generational change for women who truly deserve the support. 6 months after the disastrous country club gala, I stood alone on the expansive glass-walled balcony of my luxury penthouse. The cool evening breeze swept through the city, carrying the vibrant electric energy of the downtown financial district. I held a delicate crystal glass of rare vintage wine, taking a slow, deeply satisfying sip. The complex flavors danced across my palate. Brittany had officially finalized her highly contentious divorce from Marcus, stripping away the very last pennies he possessed in a vicious, highly publicized legal battle. I was currently working as a mid-level retail manager at a struggling suburban department store, barely making enough money to make ends meet each week. My parents were living in total miserable isolation, their carefully curated reputation completely destroyed by their own blinding arrogance. They had finally learned the devastating, brutal, completely unavoidable consequences of blindly valuing a spoiled golden child over a highly capable, fiercely intelligent daughter. I looked out over the glittering, endless, magnificent city skyline, feeling a profound, absolute, beautifully quiet sense of inner peace wash over my entire soul. True lasting freedom did not just come from successfully achieving massive, untouchable financial independence. It finally came from having the absolute, undeniable courage to completely sever ties with the toxic people who only ever viewed me as a disposable stepping stone for their own selfish ambitions. I slowly raised my crystal glass toward the glowing city lights, offering a deeply silent, victorious toast to the beautiful, unburdened future I had built entirely with my own two hands.